Hello and welcome to another video. Now in this video, I'm going to be designing and making a Gothic mansion for an upcoming production of the Addams Family musical. From building staging and church windows, a family crypt laced with detail, to spiderweb railings and even a gear-operated torture device. So let's get into the auditorium space and start the build. As you can see, we do have a bit of portable staging at our disposal and a couple of flats. Now this isn't enough for our design idea, but it's a really good starting point. So I'm going to get this measured up and put all the information into the computer so I can begin designing the rest of the set and working out how I'm going to build it. I'm just checking to make sure that all of the individual parts of this stage, it's a modular system, that they're all actually the same measurements in terms of their square and height. And of course they are. So I'm starting off by drawing each of those stages into the computer so I've got a model showing me what our starting point is going to be. And before I get too carried away with the design, I need to have a meeting with Paul, the producer, to see exactly what his ideas are. Good morning, Paul. Great to see you. I wonder if we can take a few moments to look at the features that you'd like on this set so I can finalize the design and get building.
Dan the Miracle Man. Here we go. Here we go. So exciting!
So we were thinking that this is like a basic rudimentary sketch here, Dan,
And we were kind of hoping that we could do something like this, but in your own incredible fashion, that you could make it
insanely cooler and more detailed and more skilled.
So Paul, it looks like you've got a really good idea on what you want this Gothic mansion to look like and all of the other features of this set. I'm liking this aesthetic. It's going to look really good. And I've got a few ideas on how we can make that design a little bit special. Right, well that was a very successful meeting with Paul, who's working on the production, just ironing out some of the final details of the design so I can go ahead and get the materials organised. I've used SketchUp to draw up my design because it gives me the opportunity to work through all of the intricacies of the build and then come up with a very accurate materials list. Well, after 39.5 hours working on the design, I'm finally ready to start construction. And today, in 1 hour, the material is going to arrive. So I'm going to get all of the tools out of the van, get set up on the stage, and get ready to build. There's a lot of material here, and it's heavy. So the closer we can get it to the stage, the better. And take a look at the scale of this driver. These plywood sheets are 1200mm wide. The door opening is 1220. He's got 10mm clearance on either side. No problem at all, managed to get them in there. And what we have here is 260 meters of 90 by 45 timber 4x2, 36 sheets of plywood, 120 meters of moulding, 1,000 screws and 3,000 nails. And we're going to need it all for this design. I need to build the main structure for the stage before I can begin trimming it out and making it look like the Addams Family Gothic mansion. And you've seen the mobile staging that we've got, and we just don't have enough of it. So the first job I'm going to do is make up a new set of staging to add to the existing. Now these stages I'm making are going to be exactly the same dimension as the ones that we've got, so they'll be able to be reused in the future. They'll each measure 1200mm square and 600mm in height. And I'm choosing to fix them together with these rather long lag screws, 150mm in length, because they're going to be reused, they're going to get moved around, and if they were nailed together, there's a good chance that they could work loose over time. This way they'll always stay firm and tight. Right, so that's all the frames made up. They're all identical to each other, remember. Going to assemble them again with screws and get them set up to complete the staging as you see here. And now I can get on with actually creating the set itself. You can see I've started to install the backboards here. and these are going to form the main elevation of the mansion. Now I've attached some vertical poles and then lined it with 18mm thick plywood to give me the height I need. This panel in the centre is going to form a large window, so I'm just temporarily tacking this one in place so I know I've got my measurements right, and later on I'll take it out so I can actually cut the window design. Now I've come into work very early this morning, 6 AM, because by my reckoning I've got something like 12 hours of laser cutting to do to finish off these panels, and I really want to get this done today. Now it may seem a little premature to be hitting the laser cutter for all of these decorative details at this early stage in the construction, but I'm going to be able to use these parts to get the spacing right for the rest of the structure. Well, that's one cut out of many more to go. Now, to give me the thickness I need for these crenellations, I'm going to be laminating two pieces together. And for that, I'm just using quick set wood glue and then weighting them down for a couple of hours. The design calls for a range of finials of different sizes on top of the posts. So it's back to the laser cutter to get those cut out. I've got a regular production line going on here, getting all of these parts laminated and clamped, and before you know it, all of the crenellations and spires and fence panels are all finished and ready to paint and install. I want to make the central staircase a little bit more grand than it is at the moment, and so to do that, I'm going to make up a panel, add some coving detail, and then install some newel posts. For the majority of the construction, I'm using 4x2 or 90x45 timber for the main structure, and then 18mm thick plywood for all of the panels, and that will give me some good rigidity. The panels should stay true and flat even through the changes of temperature and humidity in this space. And the benefit of making those stage extensions out of timber is that I can screw all my structure directly to it, again increasing the strength. I'm going to be doubling up the thickness of this timber for the newel posts, so it ends up being 90x90, but to give it the maximum strength, I'm screwing directly through this first piece into the structure, and then I'll add the second piece to give it its extra thickness. Also adding a top rail here just to give it a bit more visual impact. Now this top rail is going to give me somewhere to attach the balustrading or railings that I need to design and build later on in the project. It's also going to give me somewhere to fix the side wings or extensions to the building. Now this newel post is pretty strong. However, I think just to make it super strong, remembering we've got students walking up and down these steps, acting around this area, I think I'm going to get under this stage and put some screws through this staircase and into the newel post, and that will give me a lot of lateral support in this direction. But it does mean getting underneath. Right, let's head behind the stage and between the set and sight curtain and get underneath this scaffold area in order to get those screws in place for the newel post. Come back to school, they said. Build a set for the production, they said. will be fun. Now with that out of the way, I can get on with making all of the vertical posts that are going to be applied to the plywood panels. And you can see them in the drawing here, there's quite a few of them. Now they all have a little groove cut in them, and maybe you can see that in the image. The purpose for that groove will become very apparent later on. Well, with all those posts installed, you can really see that we're starting to get some height here. Now to start adding some of the more decorative detail, so it begins to look a little bit more Gothic. So what I'm doing here is just removing a strip of 25mm in width off this bottom piece here. Now the purpose of this flat surface is to attach an LED strip light that will then flood the flats with light. Now I don't want the LED strips themselves to be seen, just the light that emanates from them. So I've decided to rip 25mm off this. It'll raise it up inside the cornice pelmet moulding, and that way it shouldn't be visible from the people sitting down below the stage on the first few rows. There they are, all ready for paint. Now, fortunately, paint is not in my job description, so this will fall on somebody else's shoulders. But if I can get those painted, I can then get them installed. This is where the LED strip is going to sit, and this extra skirt, this extra length skirt, is going to allow the light to cascade down the decorative part of the flat, but not be seen from the audience. And the groove that you see in the back of the timbers will allow that strip of LED to just continue straight across, making installation much easier. Now this is my very first time using this particular style of ladder, and I have to be honest, on paper the design of these ladders is brilliant, but the reality is something else. They might be versatile, they can do lots and lots of things, but they're really not very stable. My advice, if you're looking for a pair of ladders that'll do everything, buy 3 different pairs of ladders. Now those 4 railings either side look really good, but this is a big window. And I can't fit that on the laser cutter. Those railings either side took about 3 hours to cut and then laminate together using the laser cutter. Now, that's quite a long time. Now I probably could have cut them out as quickly, but it would of course have taken me the effort rather than the laser cutter. So I think that they were worth doing using that piece of equipment. But this big window, it won't fit on the laser cutter. There's only one tool I can use to make this, and that is the jigsaw. So I'm going to have to get a template put together, lay it out on a piece of plywood, and start cutting. Now this window is in 3 layers. There's the cutout in the board that you see behind me, and then there are 2 extra layers, slightly different shapes that go on top of that, and when routed with a slight moulded edge, are going to give the effect of a quite deep Gothic arched window. So I think I need to make up that template and start cutting. Now the centrepiece of this Gothic mansion is going to be a cathedral style window, of which I have a portion of it here. Now it's actually made up of 2 parts. Well, that is, the window is 2 parts in length, but each piece is made up in 3 layers. I've got this 12mm thick plywood, which I'm going to cut out this decorative window design. But that's going to be laminated to an 18mm piece thick of plywood, which is going to form the back wall of the mansion. And then in the front of this decorative piece, there'll be another 12mm piece, which will form a frame around the window, giving it that nice depth, nice shadow lines. It should look really good. I've printed it out on A3 paper, 18 sheets to be exact, and tiled it over this plywood so I can begin with the hand jigsaw cutting this out. Now the first step is to screw this to the board that's going to become the frame on the front. That way, if I cut the profile at the same time, because they're stuck together, they'll be exactly the same as each other. There we go, that's the two sheets firmly fixed together. Right now, all I need to do is cut this top profile and these three areas here. Well, now that profile's cut out, I'm just going to spend some time marking the center of these three holes and drill through the middle. And that way, when I separate these two layers, I'll have the center of that circle marked in place. And I'll need that so I can work out where the inside diameter of the frame is going to be. Now I can separate the parts in order to finish up the frame. I can hear a curious sound outside. Sounds like a jet engine. Yep, there it is, a model jet aeroplane. What a great way to spend a sunny afternoon. So I've just marked out the center line of each of these four cutouts and transferred that down to the edge of the sheet. I want to get that center line marked on this sheet here that's going to be forming the face frame for the window. And that way I know my face frame is going to be perfectly aligned. I could easily have continued using the jigsaw to cut the straight edges, and maybe that would have been faster, to be honest, but I'd got the track saw on hand, so I thought I'd use that. The top of this window panel needs to have two arcs that form a peak. And so to do that, I put a mark at where I want the arc to start and finish. I've offset that by a 43mm bulge. And then I'm going to bend a piece of flexible material to those three marks and trace my line. And because no one's around me to actually give me a hand, I'm going to position a clamp next to my marks, here and here. So when I put the flexible straight edge into position and push it all the way out to my bulge mark, I'm on my mark here, on my mark there, so I can trace that through. I'll have a nice looking arc, just like the mock-up in the SketchUp model. So I've cut those arcs and then laid on the decorative layer, which I'm about to pierce through. Now all of these piercings are going to go through this layer and through the backboard, so that the window itself looks thicker than it really is. So I want to screw this in place, but I want the screws to be hidden. So I'm just overlaying the frame that we've just made, and that way I know I can hide the screws underneath where this frame will hide them. Just outline where the screw can't be seen. There we go. This is taking a really long time to cut out, and it's creating quite a bit of smoke. It's not very pleasant, so I think we'll try a bit of magic to finish it off. Okay, there we go. I think it was worth all that extra effort. It's a nice thick piece now. It's going to have much more authenticity. I do need to take a router or coving bit on the router and just remove this sharp edge all the way around, and that'll give it some really nice hand-carved look about it. Well, that's the window finished. Now, this did take me a heap more time than I thought it would. I kind of thought I could get this done in 2 or 3 hours. It's taken 13 hours. And the bad news, I've got one more to do because this is a double height window. The bottom window, of course, is slightly less complicated. It doesn't have this trim detail and it doesn't have this cut here, so it should take me a lot less. I'm going to guess 6 hours on the bottom window. Anyway, this one's finished, so I'm going to get it out of the workshop over to the stage and see just what it looks like out there. And then I can get back in here and finish off this bottom part of the window. Well, I think it's turned out just how I hoped. I'm going to hold off making the bottom part of the window just yet and work on trimming out the stage. So I've just made up these trim pieces, mitered on the corners, going to glue and nail those together, and those will trim off the corners of these boards really nicely. There we go. And you can see here why I need these corner posts. The sheets are full length at 2.4 meters, and because of the size of the staging, you end up with this small gap where the two pieces of sheet join. Now, our goal with this set is to produce a Gothic mansion that exudes opulence. So I'm going to be trimming all of these parts out with some baseboard or skirting board. I'm installing these spacers to give that baseboard extra thickness, remembering that the audience are sitting quite some distance away from the set, and I want all of these features and details to be really apparent and almost exaggerated. And the same goes for the newel posts. Now, I've put some spacers on there, but they're not quite thick enough, so I'm just adding some 12mm plywood to bring it out to my required thickness. Then I can trim that with some 18mm plywood with mitered joints that'll look really smart. Now, you may think I'm overdoing it with the nails here, but I really don't want there any movement in the timber through thermal expansion. It's going to be a number of weeks before the show, and then of course when the show is on, the auditorium is going to be going through numerous heat cycles. I'm adding another couple of layers of spacers to the top of this post, and that way I've got a surface to attach my collection moulding. Hey, Butterfingers. And then later some coving to finish off this detail. Now, I'll be honest, it goes against my religion to have a square cut on the back here, but there's no way anybody will see that that's not mitered. It's just not worth trimming it back. This is a production, it's a play, and it's fake, it's make-believe. I don't need to go to the trouble of mitering that back corner. So I'm not. And I'm treating the top of the newel posts to exactly the same trim, but in mirror image. And here is that coving I mentioned, the moulding. Now it's a plasterboard based material with a paper finish. It's perfect for what it's designed for. Coving against your ceiling because it's out of the way. This stuff can get damaged quite easily, and in a home I wouldn't be using this in an area close to the floor where it can easily get knocked or kicked. But for this set it's perfect. It's a cheap material and it's very easy to work with, but most importantly it's got a large radius, and it's that oversized exaggerated moulding that's going to look so good from a distance. Ow! Shot myself in the finger. Look, it's bleeding. There's a lesson to be learnt. Don't shoot yourself in the finger. The only other type of moulding I'm using on the entire set is this Scotia moulding. It's the same profile as the jib cove, but just a smaller radius. There must be hundreds of miters on this set, but to be honest, it's what gives it its Gothic Victorian appearance. All those changes in shape and profile are what are going to give it lots of shadow lines, and make it a far more interesting set for the audience to see. Well, that's another day's work complete. It's time to call it a night. Next, I'm going to be working on that lower half of the large window and look at getting the gargoyles organised for the posts. Well, good morning, David. What have we got going on with this gargoyle?
Got the gargoyle that you wanted printed for the upper sections of the set, and if you can see here, this is the slicer that loads in the 3D model. We slice it into this file here, which adds the supports, which then go through to the 3D printer.
Okay, how long is it going to take to print this one?
This one takes about a day to print.
And there are 4 of them.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess we better get printing then. And they turned out to be a 30-hour print, but they really do look good. Now I've put a link in the description to the file that we downloaded. With the 3D printer busy making those gargoyles for us, it's time to get back into the workshop and make the lower half of that large window. this lower half of the window is made in much the same way as the top half. 3 layers in total, so I'm just going to laminate those together and get this window installed. Now the window's installed, time to try out a little bit of lighting and just see what kind of shadows we're getting cast. Yeah, it's casting a really weird shadow, isn't it? It almost looks like the Hibbs Hills is trying to be projected on it.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? You can almost read Hibbs in that. Yeah. Well, we'll lean the ladder against it, and worst case scenario, it just collapses and tears the sun.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
It's a really wobbly ladder.
Okay.
So after a short debate, David's decided he really does need to move those track lights in order to even out those shadows. And with that done, I can get back onto construction.
Now, the parts I'm going to be working on this morning are these 2 columns that you see either side of the large church window. Now, these columns are supporting these large gargoyles, and they have this quite decorative trim work, and I want to install that onto the post before I put it into position, because quite simply, it's just too high to be working on a tall ladder in order to construct this. So I'll do it down on the bench and then install the post. Now, if I can get those in this morning, and then I can trim out the bottoms of those posts, you can see we've got this plinth detail here, and then get on to the final stages. So I'm going to get the tools set up and get started on this. It's an early start today. I want to try and get into the swing of things before this auditorium fills up with students and photographers. Today is school photograph day. We all love that day, don't we? Fortunately, I'm on the stage. I'm not going to get in their way, so I can just carry on with this job and try and make some more progress. Now, this is just a spacer which is going to give me somewhere to attach the cove moulding and the Belection moulding on the outside edge. The reason I'm adding glue to this join is because this auditorium is going to go through quite a lot of hot-cold cycles, especially when they get lots of bodies in here. And I don't want the possibility of these joints opening up, this timber moving too much.
And you'll see I'm using the same moulding throughout this design, a combination of coving and Belection moulding to give me this nice deep profile. that's it, ready to install. And you can see there's a section missing on the back here. And that's so it will wrap around the window and the frame at the top. Well, it quickly became apparent that the use of power tools wasn't congruent with the school photographs that were trying to be taken in the auditorium, so I took the rest of yesterday off. But what could happen during that time was Paul could get in there with his team and start the painting. So let's head inside this morning and see just what it looks like now that it's in primer. Okay, let's take a look at what Paul's been doing while I was away yesterday, and he's been busy with his paint team. Look at this in the background here, all of it white. This is the Addams Family, and we can't be having white. Now, fortunately, this is just the primer. There'll be a whole lot of different colours going on this, but this is just the base coat, and actually, I think it looks pretty good. Now this piece of timber I'm installing now is the backer board for the cornice moulding. Now this cornice moulding is going to run all the way around the flats as you see here, and we'll finish off the recess that's going to be holding the LED strip lights. Now I'm purposely leaving this little piece of trim off because you can see the groove there. That's where I'm going to be sliding in the conduit for the LED downlights, and then I'll put this on, cap it off, and you won't know they're there. Help me! To finish off, I'm going to put the spire in the centre, and I forgot to pre-drill these long posts, so I'm stuck up a ladder and just pop a hole in the top. And these simply, because I've doweled the ends of them, just drop straight in place. Just like that. And it quickly became apparent that they're actually quite wobbly, and so any movement on set could cause them to unsettle. So I've decided to glue them in with some construction adhesive. Somebody put the alarm on me. I guess it is quite late. I'm going to finish off this little bit of trim and then call it a night.
Right, I think that's a milestone reached. I've got all the trim in place on the flats that are currently installed. Now there are still 2 flats to build for either end of this construction here, and then a range of other bits and pieces, but focusing on this structure, there are 4 more flats to build. They're simpler than what you see here, and they shouldn't take me therefore too long. But it's nearly 8 o'clock at night. That means I've been here for 12 hours today, and I think it's time to take a break. So, until tomorrow. So there's a couple of things I want to try and achieve today, and one of them is to try and trim out and finish up this newel post so that it matches its friend over here. I've got the base trim to put in place and a little bit underneath the capping here. And I want to trim out these 2 posts either side of this large window. Just want to put a little bit of baseboard trim on either side there just to finish that off. And then I can get on with these flats over here. So on either side of this set, I need to position 2 of these wheeled mobile flats, 2 side by side to extend the length of this room. So this needs trimming out to basically match this minus the crenellations on top. And I need to do the same on the other side. And then when that's finished, I can spin these guys around. And on this side, I need to make some fencing and some fence posts, and this will form part of a scene that happens in a graveyard. 4 of those to do, double-sided. Let's see how far I can get today. Now for a little bit of track saw action to get all of these parts cut up to make these plinths for both sides of these 4 flats. Now these pieces here are forming the tops of the boxes that are hiding the bases of these 4 flats, and I want this to appear like a cabinet, and so I'm just going to break the edges with the router to give that illusion. Okay, a little bit of sanding just to get rid of that sharp edge, and that will give the illusion I'm looking for. Okay, I've got all my parts made out now for these boxes, which are going to form the front and the back of these flats. Remember, these flats are reversible, and I've got them labelled up, so in theory, I shouldn't make any mistakes here. Now, in speaking of mistakes, I've cut all of these parts out based on the measurements I calculated. I haven't done a test fit. I've just run them all off, hoping and expecting that I got my numbers right. Well, let's find out. And before I go any further, I'm just going to try this out. This is the side of the flat which is going to have the fence on it. It's painted black. And the idea is that this box sits just inside, like so. Good. And then the front panel comes up almost to the floor and hides those wheels. And we'll get some nails in. Now I'll do the same to the other side. The other side, of course, is an extension to the Gothic mansion, the room. Just to give it a little bit more strength, I'm going to pop some screws in there through the base into those gussets. Now we can put the front skirt on. And there we go. Reasonable good job of hiding those wheels. Still need to put an end panel on, of course. Let's do the same to this side. So I've mentioned that this is going to be a fence panel on this side of the flat, and this is part of that fence panel. Now it's the largest piece I could cut in the laser cutter, so I will do it in 2 halves. Actually it's 4 because I'm laminating it to give it thickness, and it's going to hover around about here. There'll be a post on either side supporting it. The purpose of the box at the bottom is predominantly to hide those wheels so it doesn't look like a movable flat. However, I'm going to wrap this in some polystyrene, get some carving going on to make it look like stone. So there'll be a stone or brick wall at the bottom with a steel fence above. That's the illusion we're trying to create. Now I really could have bought 90 by 90 timber to make all of these posts. Instead I chose to use 90 by 45 and laminate them together. And here's the reason why. You can see that this piece on top is quite bowed. It's offset by about 6 mil, quarter of an inch. And so by laminating them I can straighten them up as I screw them to each other, and thereby making sure that they stay straighter for longer. If I'd bought 90 by 90 timber, it would have been bowed and warped and twisted, and I wouldn't be able to prevent that. And here are those fence panels that I laser cut the other day, laminated together, so 2 layers thick, and because of the size of these they wouldn't fit on the laser cutter. I've got a split join here, and on the back layer the join is a little bit lower down so we get some strength. Now these are going to get painted up and then simply fixed into place on the posts, just like so. Now to trim out the bottom of those posts that I mentioned earlier, and it's the same detail as previous, a baseboard with some belection moulding followed by some coving. So this side of these mobile flats is almost complete. I just need to put a skirting board or baseboard along the bottom edge and then return it along this front corner so that the audience sitting down over this area, the same over that area, get to see what looks like a finished piece. But before I do that, there is an issue. Now, as you know, these are mobile flats and they will be moved around, spun around and repositioned during this production. And you can see on the end that we can see the construction, we can see inside. And although we could paint all of that black and make it nearly disappear, it doesn't look as good as paneling that out. So I've made up these panels, I'm going to be fixing those in position just like so, and that way when it's all painted up, they'll disappear and they'll look far better. You'll notice there's a slot cut in the end there, and that is because these caster wheels, these ones have a brake on them, and the brake sticks out beyond the structure. So I do need somewhere for that brake to stick through. I'm going to get these fixed in place, then I can work on that baseboard.
Here you can see why these flats only have one post on them, so that when they're next to each other, they have the appearance of being one wall. I'm being mindful here to hold the baseboard slightly off the stage, and that way the wheels will still operate without this binding. Along the front edge it's a bit longer, I'm making use of some wedges to do the same. And a little bit more of that Belection moulding, and it looks like a finished skirting board. Now, this rearmost part of the set is supposed to resemble the wall of a Gothic mansion, and so we're going to be putting some windows in here. I've printed out the profile on some paper and I'm hanging it up to use as a template for the jigsaw. And now all four have been cut out, I'm going to run round the inside with that curving bit on the router. And that'll give these windows an extra shadow line, all to help with the illusion of this being an actual mansion.
Now I've finished these cutouts and routed around the inside edge, I'm going to complete the illusion of these being windows by adding these plywood frames. Now these are laminated, two pieces of 3/4 inch, 18mm thick ply, and you can see the insides have been cut to different measurements and then routed. And that will really help give that depth illusion. I'm going to add these to each of these cutouts. I'm just going to put one screw in just to hold it in place for now so I can just check that they look okay. We are going to be taking these frames down so that we can finish the decoration and painting of this flat area. Right, let's get these installed and see how they look. Now that's really as much as I can do on this main part of the set until I've got the picture frames to install on the two flats either side of me. Now in the meantime, I do have other things to be working on. There's a crypt, there's a torture device, and there's some railings and fencing to go either side of this staircase. So I think I'm going to take a break from this main part of the set and start working on the crypt, which is rather involved. Now, I've spent some time on the computer here, just working out exactly how I'm going to be building this crypt. And more importantly, I've been able to put together a cutting list so I can get back into the auditorium and get all this cut out and assembled with some speed.
But just before I make a start of that, you'll notice the two flats behind me to stage left are plain, and these need to have some picture frames on them. The panels behind those frames are going to be cut out, so the actors who are playing the ancestors can appear. So we're going to have these living pictures in the backdrop. And here's Camilla to deliver the first of those frames.
So how many frames have you got to make in total?
8, yeah.
8, okay.
And so now all the rectangle ones are done.
Right.
And this guy is going on this side.
Let's just hold him up and have a look.
Yeah.
And we'll position them where you and Paul have agreed.
Okay.
And I'll draw just around the inside of the frame.
Sounds good.
And then Paul can agree or disagree.
You
Don't they look good?
Oh my gosh! This is amazing!
So if you can just hold it there for a couple of hours while we just...
Oh yeah,
you know.
that's cool. I'll just be the human clamp.
Yeah.
That's cool, that's cool. My hourly rate, right? Like, if you imagine 2 people, would that be fine?
Yeah.
Like, would it fit?
See, you're coming out. And we'll get them to kind of like do a family portrait kind of thing, you know, that kind of thing.
Are we fitting? Yeah, sweet.
Now, the crypt that's used in the graveyard scene belongs to the Addams family, so I'm going to be putting their insignia above the opening of the doorway. I'm using the laser cutter again with 6mm thick plywood, and to give it some depth, I'm laminating the letters with 3 layers. The door of the crypt needs to be functional. Actors need to be able to get onto scene by walking through the door. But the crypt itself needs to be portable, so I'm trying to keep the weight down. It's constructed of 2 boxed columns joined together by a header. And I'm starting by making the parts for the columns. Now they're laminated plywood with the decorative features in them, rather like the large window. I'm just checking to make sure that these rosette mouldings are central to the cutout on the opposite side, so when I turn them over, they're concentric. And just one more piece to laminate in place, and the fronts of these columns are done. I'll let those sit for a couple of hours with the weight on to let the glue dry, while I go into the workshop and make a start of the header, which is going to join the 2 columns together. And this has got a wide curved piece of trim at the top to give it a nice shadow line, and an arched lintel above the doorway to make. I'm using a couple of pieces of 18mm thick plywood to make that arched lintel. I'll laminate them together and attach them to the back panel, then it'll be ready to join onto the columns. Now I'm not going to be fixing the letters to the backboard yet. I'm going to wait until they've painted it, because it'll be much easier for them to do that before I install those letters. Now the columns need to be joined onto that header in a quick and efficient way, but also it needs to be quite strong. So I've cut a slot the same width as the plywood so it'll all lock together, which you'll see in a moment. Nailing these columns together, I soon realised that it could quite easily get to become a very heavy structure. So I decided not to put a back in these columns. The audience won't see the back part of the crypt, they'll only see the front and the sides. But to give it some extra strength and rigidity, I'm going to put these gussets that you see at regular intervals along the length. The other benefit of using this slot-together type of construction is it will be easy to take apart and perhaps store after the show is finished. I don't want to just rely on friction to hold these parts together. I do need to put some screws in. So I'm putting in a batten of timber that I can add some screws to. Again, there's no glue here, so I can disassemble this in the future. This is quite a tall and thin structure, and so therefore it's a little off balance. So I've screwed a baseboard to it, and that does mean we can also put a sandbag on that if we need to, and then giving it a little bit of extra support with these gussets. I'm treating this crypt to the same decorative details and mouldings as the rest of the set. And that not only makes construction easier, but it also, I guess, gives you a clean design through a continuity of aesthetic. Anyway, the painting crew are in again this evening, so I need to get this finished up and out of their way. If you remember those 3D printed gargoyles that took 30 hours each to print, Gino is doing an amazing job here painting those up to make them look like bronze ornaments. So the reason I haven't returned this baseboard or skirting board into the doorway reveal here, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I don't want the actors tripping up and catching their clothing on that as they come through. It could be a dark scene, I'm not sure. And the second, perhaps slightly more important reason, is that the door is going to be opening outwards. And if there's build-up of moulding here, it will prevent that door fully opening. So I've stopped it clean and flush, but there's an issue. You can see underneath this coving, you can see a hole. An audience from certain angles are going to be able to see that. So I'm just going to get a piece of thin board. This is MDF, 1/8 of an inch thick, 3mm. Just going to hold that off in position here. I've already set the coving back by 3mm from the face. Just trace round line. I'm going to cut that shape out, glue it on the end. You'll never know. Right, let's see how that piece fits. Oh yeah, good. I'm going to glue that in, and then once that's all painted, it'll look nice and clean. Nice. This crypt needs a door, so I've decided to use fence palings. They're a nice rough finished timber, they'll have a good rustic appearance to them, and they're actually really cost effective. Just resting them in position, tracing around the shape of the curve, and then laying them flat so I can join them together and get them cut out to shape. I want the door to have a little bit of clearance at the top, so I'm just tracing out the shape of the arc, giving myself about 1 centimetre clearance. Now this is the back side of the door, so I'm attaching some bracing with some screws, and it doesn't need to look good, it just needs to be strong enough to hold all the parts together. So I'm just about to install the hinges onto this door, and at the bottom you can see that the hinge strap is well supported by this gusset. But the top of the door, this top door hinge, has nothing to support it. Now I could just cut this off and maybe just put 2 screws into this jamb here, but that's going to be bearing the brunt of the weight of this door, and it's reasonably heavy. So what I've done is made up this plywood panel here, and this has got a series of spacers, and you'll see how it works if I slot it into here. It'll allow me to fix the back side of this big piece of plywood to this jamb. This small spacer will make up the difference between the hinge and the jamb, and it gives me the length I need to be able to put in some nice long screws and give it lots of support. Perfect. Okay. Right, so we just need a door handle in order to open it from outside, and then to cover over these hinges, I've cut out these decorative pieces which are going to be painted up and then just glued over like so. David's been spending some time getting all of the components wired together for those LED downlighters and getting them installed into a DMX controller. So before we go to the trouble of mounting them, just a quick test to make sure that they're performing as expected. Right. Once he's happy that the dip switches are giving the LED colour that he's expecting, we can go ahead and mount the LED into the extrusion and diffuser and then thread it into that groove that I created right back at the beginning of this build.
There we go.
You're through.
Oh yeah, we're good.
$300 mil. 200.
I'm almost there. Here we go.
Okay.
All right, we're all the way in now.
Good.
Cool. This should be red,
Red, yes.
blue,
Green.
green, yeah, yeah.
Yep. Blue.
Rainbow.
Perfect. It's good.
Good.
Success.
So it's 157. That's what we need to turn
So
on.
this is basically app controlling the controller that you've just put on the LEDs, is that right?
No, this is setting up the dip switches.
Yeah.
So that then we can control it from up in the box up there.
Cool.
Yeah, I was thinking it was going to be the 157.
One final check now the DMX cable's been connected, just to see that everything's working correctly from up in the booth. And now we know that works, we can go ahead and install the other 3 LED strips. Now the next major set piece I've decided to work on is the torture rack, or the torture device, and all I've got to work with is this pre-existing wheeled platform. So I've designed it to work within the dimensional constraints of this platform. I've made a tall backboard up, I'm just going to pop this on its side and screw them together so I've got a structure I can begin making the mechanism to attach to. The tall backrest, it's 2.4 meters in height, does need to support the weight of a person, so I'm adding some gusset plates to the side, not only to give that backboard a lot of additional strength, but also somewhere to attach the gearing to. Well, now this platform has got a big, strong backboard here, some good-sized gussets here to give it plenty of strength. I think that this will quite easily take the weight of a person sitting on a seat. So I need to build a frame that allows a seat to project from here so the actor can sit on there, and then his arms and legs are going to be attached to ropes, and when the lever is pulled on the side, those arms and legs are going to be pulled up around 300-400 millimeters in travel. That's the plan anyway, and so what I've got to do is construct a mechanism, a series of pulleys that fits in this area here, so that when the actor of Wednesday pulls the lever on the side, it operates these pulleys and pulls the rope through those 4 locations for the arms and the legs. Now, as you've seen, I've got the plan on the computer, and I think that's going to work. It certainly works in theory, so I'm going to get over to the workshop now, make a few pulleys, and have a look at what steel I've got to use as axle rods, and figure out how I'm going to attach this to this structure so that the pulleys and the gears run freely. It's true to say that this torture rack is really getting quite complicated. I've got all of these gears that I've designed in order to roll these pulleys the right amount of distance to pull on the rope. However, I wanted to laser cut these gears, and because the laser cutter can only cut thin material, I'm working with 6mm. It will go up to 9, sometimes 12. I'm using 6mm because it's guaranteed success, and I'm cutting 6 of everything out and layering them or laminating them together to give me a really thick, heavy-duty gear. Now, the reason I've gone for a super thick is so that it gives it extra strength. This is just plywood. I don't want it breaking under strain. And secondly, it's going to be far more visible to the audience who are sitting some distance away from this device whilst it's being operated. Now, I've also spent some time working out on paper exactly how I'm going to support these gears so that they can rotate and spin and not have any lateral movement. And I've come up with a design which I think is reasonably sensible. A little bit of work on the lathe, I'll be able to get these bearings in place, and I think that will give me the best chance of success. So how I've decided to captivate these bearings is to alter the laser cut files
it meant there are 6 layers in each of these pieces. I've altered it so that a couple of those layers have got a slightly bigger diameter hole, 30mm diameter hole. And that way, when I come to glue these together, laminate them, I can drop the bearing inside that 30mm hole and laminate the parts together, sandwiching the bearing inside. And then when I machine my axle to suit the inner race of this bearing, it'll pick up on that and give me a nice smooth action, I think. And because this is only going to be moved 45 degrees, quarter of a rotation, those bearings are never going to wear out. I need to counterbore the hole inside this idler gear to accept this bearing. Now the bearing is 30mm diameter and I've got a Forstner bit 30mm diameter, but I want to make sure that I drill it in the center so that the 2 holes are concentric. So I've put my 20mm spade bit in here and you can see that's perfectly lined up now with the inside bore of that gear. Then I can swap this out for the 30mm Forstner bit and bore the hole knowing that the 2 are going to be concentric. There we go. Now that should press nicely into that hole. Now I need to make a bunch of axles to suit all of these gears here. I've made myself a bunch of drawings showing how all the parts go together so I can get onto the lathe and start making these parts to suit.
I'm using a piece of 50mm diameter bar stock to make these axles because that's what we've got in the workshop. And I'm starting by facing off one end, center drilling, so I can add a live center to give some support as I turn down the diameter to the measurements on my sketch.
There we are. Perfect fit. Right, I'm going to part this off here. Don't have a parting tool, so I'm going to use the hacksaw to cut it off, pop it back in the lathe and face it off. And I need to make one more of these with a slightly longer shoulder here, and that gets my 2 axles complete. Still, of course, need to just thread with a die. The end here I'm going to go for an N10 by 1.5mm pitch.
I gave quite a bit of thought to how I could attach the wooden gearing to the steel axle, and I came up with these small bosses. The idea here is that these can be drilled and countersunk, so I can attach them to the wooden gears using wood screws, then drilled and tapped on their outer diameter, and a bolt used as a pinch bolt to hold it tight onto the axle. And this technique will also allow me to loosen that pinch bolt and make fine adjustments to the exact position of the gears and pulleys. That way I should be able to fine-tune it to work perfectly. Now I'm just running an M10 die on the end of those axles, and that way I'll be able to use a nut to secure the gears into position. Time for some assembly. Now this gear set has got a bearing embedded in between a couple of the layers of plywood. Now the plywood is 6mm thick and the bearing is 9, so it's actually got 2 layers for its housing. That means it's floating in a 12mm wide space, which means that the gear set itself could move by 3mm, 1/8 of an inch. So to prevent that from happening, this bearing here, I've bedded it down against the backside of this layer. Then I'll put this crush washer in, or spacer, and then I'll put the top bearing in place. And when the nut goes on, it will push that bearing out and keeping it in position. And that way this gear set can't shift on the axle. So, pop this on the axle, put the spacer in place, keep that distance between the bearings, and then the bearing itself. And there we are, done. That assembly is complete. Now with the handle, it's a similar situation. We've got a bearing embedded underneath one layer and it's floating. So again, I've pushed it down to the bottom of that recess, got myself a small spacer, which I'll drop in there, and then the bearing on top. This axle's slightly different, it's longer, and it goes in this side here. And that is going to create the space so that these 2 gears are at the correct height. Because those 2 mesh, and those 2 mesh. When gluing all the parts together to create the pulleys, there's a lot of lamination, and I don't want them to be off-center, so I'm using the axle as a guide to ensure that all the parts are concentric. And as I thread them onto the axle, I'm just making sure to give even pressure whilst spinning it slightly to help spread that glue out. That's 1 pulley completed and ready to clamp up. I've just got 3 more to make. Now, last thing I need to do before I'm ready to assemble these is just weld a nut onto the end of the axle. Now the purpose of this is so I can attach a decorative gear on the end, and this will be something that doesn't have any function but will actually rotate as the device has been operated, so it's something else of visual interest to the audience. That's the topmost axle and pulley set assembled. Now on to the slightly more complicated lower set. Now I've welded this plate, as you can see on the back here, welded it to the axle, but I need it to run true. I'm going to be bolting the gear or screwing the gear to this plate, and I've just lined it up. I don't have a DTI, but I do have a cutter, and you can see there it's just skimming. It's actually got about a 2mm gap on those 2 corners, and it's tight on that one and that one. So I'm going to machine this face just a little bit just to bring it nice and true. Let's get these two axles over to the stage and assembled onto that torture rack. I'm measuring out the position for the holes where the rope is going to pass through, and I'm using a hole saw to drill through from both sides, halfway from the front and halfway from the back, and that way I prevent any splitting or blowout. So I've made these cotton reel rollers, and I want them to be embedded in the base and protruding here so that the rope has got something to guide it underneath this platform. So I'm cutting out this rectangle here, and then I'll install these two sides, screwed in from underneath, and the cotton reel will run on that axle in the centre. Man, it's not that. Now I'm hopeful that this wheel doesn't get in the way of the roller. Ooh, good. The rope that goes around this pulley is the one that's going to be pulling the actor's legs, and so it needs to get its way back to the gearing system so it can actually operate. In order for that to happen, the rope has to come through this pulley and go through these two struts here before it can get to this pulley at the back. So I've taken the measurement from the edge of the framework to the centre of the pulley, and transfer that round to this face and drill a hole through here so the rope can pass through these struts. The rope I'm using is 20 millimeters diameter, so I'm going to drill a 25 millimeter diameter hole, and that way there'll be just a little bit of clearance for it to pass through. Well, this caster wheel is in the way of my drill, and I've got a sneaky suspicion it's in the way of the rope as well, which means I will have to relocate it. So I'm going to take it off and deal with it as a problem in a minute. Here. And as you can see, that caster wheel is definitely in the way. Never mind. Now, once this structure is upright, it's going to be mighty heavy and quite fragile on the side of the gears. And I'm concerned that during operation, this happens. So what I'm going to do is just attach a piece of wood or plastic across here, and that way, if this does go slack, it cannot fall off the runners. I'm leaving just a couple of millimeters gap in between these two central bosses because this is how the axle keeps its alignment. It's this central dividing panel that stops the axle moving to the left or right. And here you can see how that rope comes underneath the platform and up through these rollers. Bit of lash in the gears there, so I'm just going to tighten that up just a fraction. Right, that's as tight as I can get that nut, and there's a little bit of slack in this handle, and I don't like that. So I am going to take that nut off, put some washers behind it, and maybe behind the bearing as well, and that'll get rid of all of that lateral movement. But let's test it and see if it actually functions. Well, I think that's success. Now it still needs to pull the pulleys, which I haven't tightened up, the top axle, which I haven't installed yet, and of course, it's got to pull on the resistance of the rope. So that will be the true test. Right now, I think that's pretty successful. Now here's a problem. This piece of steel I just found in the workshop, and it's got a slight bend in it. That means if I'm trying to align it with 3 of these gusset plates, as it rotates, it's actually binding on this central plate. Now, there's not going to be any weight on this. No students are going to be using this as pull-up bars, I hope. And so I think I can get rid of this completely. That will free it up from any binding, because I do want that to rotate quite freely. I don't want the rope slipping, because I do want the axle to rotate, because I want these fake gears to spin when the lever is pulled. Right, just align the poly there with the hole in the back plate. Away, and then I'm just going to pinch this up just lightly for now. When I've got my eye on the other side and I know it's working well, then I'll pinch it up nice and tight to make an indentation in this tube so it cannot slip. If I put a straight edge against the face of the pulley, I can align it perfectly with the undercarriage pulley, just like that. I do need to attach this rope to the pulleys, and I can't just put a screw through it because it would potentially pull on this and tear through the rope. So what I'm contemplating is making a steel plate, maybe about 75 millimeters long, 25 millimeters wide, and putting 3 screws through the plate, through the rope, and into the central pulley. And that way, it'll really clamp it in place. I need 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'll head off to the workshop, make those, and once I've got the ropes clamped in place, I can finally tighten up the top pulleys and then test the mechanism properly. Now, after some testing yesterday of this torture rack with a student, it has presented a couple of issues, a couple of problems, some things I need to improve. Like any prototype, it's never going to work perfectly first time round. Now, the couple of things that did work well, well, actually, only one thing worked well, and that was the way that the lever operates these ropes, which are attached to the student's wrists and are designed to extend their arms vertically. Now, that worked really well. But a couple of other things do need some tweaks and adjustments, and one of them is this lever. Now, there is the potential for the student to push it too far forwards or pull it too far backwards, and that would cause it to unmesh from its gear. And if that happens mid-show, they're not going to be able to get it re-engaged seamlessly. So that's a simple fix. I've made up these metal stops. They'll act as bump stops. I'll attach one into this framework here, and they will limit the travel of this lever. Nice and easy. Well, there we go. With that simple stop installed, it means the lever can't be pushed too far forwards, and then when it's pulled in this direction, it also stops the travel. What's not so easy to fix is the problem we had with these ropes attached to the ankles of the student. Now, they're supposed to be pulling the leg forward and backwards. So the student would be sitting on a seat round about here, and then their legs would be pulled outward like so. Now, as we'd got him sitting on a stool, he was too far forward, very close to these rollers at the front, and there was no room for movement. That's the first problem. The second problem is that the seat height that we'd chosen allowed the student to put his feet on the platform. That's how he gets on the seat. Now, the problem there is when he's sitting in the relaxed position, he just looks like he's sitting there, not like he's attached to a torture device. So I need to have the seat high enough so his legs are going to be dangling. Now, that means he might need some kind of step stool in order to get onto the seat and get balanced. So I really need to make the seat, get that installed at the right height, and then work out how we can support the student getting into this device. The arms aren't long enough.
So centre line minus half of 18 is 9. Centre line is half of 1240, which is 620 minus 9, 611.
Pretty happy with that.
I think we're done. Make those fair leads, and then we're ready to test this again with the actor. And that way I can determine the exact length of these wrist hoops.
And you can see here more clearly the problem. If the rope was pulled in line with the pulley, it would be fine. But it's not, it's pulled to the side. So I make these fair leads and screw them in place, and this will guide the rope directly onto the cotton reel pulley. The construction is coming along really well, as is the painting, as you can see. But there's one more thing I need to make, and that's for this area here. Now, when the actors are standing up on this platform, it is quite a drop, and it's in fact just under 1 meter. Now, if somebody were to step close to the edge and trip, that's going to cause a problem. We want the actors to break a leg, but not break a leg. So, I'm going to make some railings. The railings can't be such that it blocks the view of the actors from the audience, or the backdrop, the windows, etc. So it's going to be a railing made of steel. I'm going to make it look like a spider's web, or at least that's the plan. I'm going to throw a piece of plywood up here, sketch out a rough idea of the design for the web fencing, and then take it across to the workshop and see if I can fabricate something up. Now the width here, I've got about 2.4 meters. Yep, just over 2.4 meters. And height-wise, well, I can come as high on this corner as, let's say, 1 meter. That'll bring me just below that cornice moulding. And then over here, probably a little lower. And that'll give me that sort of quadrant web-shaped style that I think we want to go for. So let's get a sheet of plywood up here and see if we can get it balanced in place to sketch up a design. After roughing out that design with the pencil, there's quite a lot of marks on this template. So I've gone over that with a Sharpie, with a marker pen, just to try and highlight exactly which curve I want to try and recreate in the workshop. But even that's not very clear. So I've masked off the set so I can get a spray can and just outline exactly the shape I want to try and recreate. I think that'll do. Now I need to make 2 of these, and they need to be mirror images of each other, one for either side. But I don't want them to be exactly the same and identical. They'll be very similar. I want to try and just tweak it a little bit in the workshop as I'm bending the steel. But generally, I think that's going to work well. get this template down, over to the workshop and see if I can find some steel to make it out of. To make these spiderweb railings, I'm using some 12mm 1/2-inch diameter hollow tube. And I'm using a range of different techniques in order to get the bends and radiuses that I'm after. Now for these long sweeping curves, you can see I can easily bend this by hand just by holding one part in the vise, and then offering it up to the template and making small adjustments as I go. When it came to creating these tighter radiuses, I made use of the tube bender, which you'll see in a moment, just bending into a random curve and then offering it up to the template to see where it best fits, cutting it off to length and then putting a small tack weld just to hold it in position until I've got the whole thing roughed out. And here's the tube bender. Now it's designed to bend steel to a set radius, and I don't want uniformity, so I'm just using the action of the bender to put small bends in the pipe, and then working it back and forth to try and get it as smooth as possible, whilst also giving me a random curve. Well, that's the main construction of the web completed, and I'm pretty happy with the way it's turned out. It does look a little bit Batman, if I'm honest, but I'm hoping that once it's actually on the stage and in the context of the Gothic mansion, it's going to look a little bit more Addams Family. But in order to mount it, and in order to finish it, there's a few more things I need to do. I'm going to make a bracket plate here that ties all these tails together and hides them, but also bends and wraps underneath, so I've got somewhere to fix it down to the stage. And of course, I need to trim all of these tails and these ends off and weld the other side and make sure there's no sharp edges on there. But as a main construction, I think it's actually looking really quite good. I've made this small wooden guide block cut to 32.5 degrees because that's the angle between the back of the stage and the side flats, and this will ensure that I weld on the bracket in the right location.
Well, that's really strong, but you can see we've got quite a bit of wobble going on here. And I think what I can do to maybe improve that is weld a triangular gusset plate in here, maybe two, and that will just strengthen up that bend. Well, that's the first piece of balustrading complete and a test fit to see just how it looks. What do you think? Check it out.
And it didn't take too long to add a couple of strengthening bars to the back of those railings, and it really has improved the rigidity. Uh-oh. No, don't worry, this isn't a fire. We're actually testing out the fog machine in terms of where we need to locate it. And with a little bit of testing, it didn't take too long before David came up with the idea of trying it out behind the window, getting the fog to come down the staircase. And honestly, it looks really good. However, coming through the window didn't look so great. So I've installed a shelf behind the stage and cut a slot for the fog to come through, and that way it won't be visible to the audience until it's operating. And with a little bit of green accent lighting, this will be fit for any graveyard scene.
Now this door's been stained, I can fit the door handle and those hinge cover plates. Now I've got this beautiful old rusty cast iron Victorian handle. I think it's going to look just right on this crypt. I'm going to install that, get the hinge cover plates in place, and then finish off writing and the gargoyle for the top here.
The square backing plate of this handle has a small dimple on one of the corners, and that's so if the handle were to work loose, that escutcheon plate wouldn't start to rotate. So I'm just pressing that into the timber to locate where it would be, and then drilling a small dimple. Now the stud running through the centre is really quite long, and I don't want to cut it because it's original. So I'm using this small spacer to make up the difference, but it'll also give somewhere for the stagehands to be able to close the door without having to come onto set. Now the glue's had a couple of hours to dry, I can remove this laser cut template and reveal the letters in all their glory. Nice. Well, I'm getting to the end of my job list, but there's still a few things to do, such as finishing off these fences. Now if you remember, these are the flats that are on wheels and they spin around to reveal fencing on one side and a room on the other. Now these fence panels are going to be used in the graveyard scene alongside the crypt. So I'm just attaching these with some screws, and you'll notice there's a gap in between the fence and the backboard, and that'll help create a nice shadow. Hey, perfect. Nice. And it was all going so well until I was rudely interrupted.
Dan? Shh. Okay, I wanted to talk. Oh, sorry, you videoing.
Yeah, that will now make it into the video.
Hang on, we need a face for the voice.
Now, after spending some time testing out this torture rack with the students, I've managed to get these ropes for the feet and for the arms to the right length and tied up nice and tight so there's no chance of them coming loose during the production. However, there's two things I'm not liking here. The first thing is the aesthetic. This black tape does a nice job, but it really doesn't look good, and it's got a slightly shiny surface. It's going to be reflective in the light. It's going to draw your eyes' attention to that, and that's not something we want. And so what I've decided to do is use some of this thin 6 to 8 millimeter diameter twine, and as you can see over on the other side here, wrap it up so it hides that plastic. It looks much more authentic. I just need to find a way of tying this off, which I'll get to in a moment. But the other thing I don't like, if I step out of the way, you should be able to see, is that both sides, left and right, are symmetrical. This loops this way with the tail up on the right-hand side, and this one is the same. And I'm just not liking it. I think they should be mirror images of each other. Now, does this matter? Absolutely not. Will anybody else notice this? Surely they won't. But I'm going to be sitting in the audience, and that's what my eye is going to go to. So for the sake of a couple of moments, I'm going to cut this tape and just loop this the other way so that they're symmetrical.
And with that bound up nice and tightly, I'm just going to use some hot glue to hold the tail in place. And I'm doing this on the back, so it should be invisible. Now remember, hot glue is, well, it's hot and it will burn you. So I'm just moistening my finger first, and that way it'll cool the glue as soon as it makes contact. And making the same modification to the leg ties, it's ready to test out and see how well it works. It works really well. Now Paul has got his foot on the device because it's got wheels and the thing moves around, and that won't do during the show because it blocks the view of the gearing system. But that's okay, we're going to have a stagehand behind the device holding it steady as Wednesday pulls on the lever.
Now the easiest way to mount these picture frames is going to be putting screws in from behind. It'll be really fast and efficient. But I don't like it. Camilla's done an excellent job laminating these pieces together to give some depth, some third dimension to the frames, and they look really good. However, by mounting them on the face, they're kind of losing a bit of that depth. To make it more authentic, I'm going to put some plywood spacers behind these frames and have them sitting maybe about 12 millimeters off, and that way we'll get a nice shadow line when the spotlights are on running around the perimeter, and I think it'll look give it more depth and make it look far more authentic. So I'm going to take these up to the workshop and just glue some plywood strips on the back.
And then after a little bit of paint to cover over those raw edges, I can get those installed.
Well, I think that was definitely worth taking the extra time to put that spacer in. And you can see here, even with just the house lights on, this shadow line that's appearing around here. I think it gives a lot of depth to these frames. It's going to look great when the ancestors are standing behind here during the show.
And the very last job to do before I can call this set finished is glue on these gargoyles. Couple of dabs of construction adhesive, fix them in place, and we're done.
Well, there it is after 281 hours of design and construction. My little piece in this show is finally over.
And with that, it's time to get these seats out and get ready for the show.
Well, I really can't wait to see this show. I think it's going to be absolutely epic and the students are doing an amazing job through their rehearsals. But that's it for now. Until next time, thanks so much for watching. Bye.
Until next time. That won't be a next time. It's nearly killed me.